GM and welcome to From A to Z. I'm Zombie Shepherd, and we're back at you in 2026 here. And so the last episode, I talked a lot about how, as a species, we need to move towards a post-violent economic and global political system. And we're nowhere near there because since then, not like it hasn't happened a lot, but since then, at least four people have been killed in 2026 by ICE agents. And in 2025, not one day went by where a cop or a law enforcement agent of some kind was not prosecuted or arrested for sex crimes. So the violence of the state is never ending. And the men who wear badges to do the violence of the state take the spoils of war, as they always have throughout history. And the spoils of war is sexual assault and murder. And we have to do something about this. This has to change. This way that our society runs has to change. And it's not going to change anytime soon, and it's not going to change without violence. The biggest mistake the United States ever made was not executing every Confederate general, but instead letting them become presidents. That is a stain forever that we are going to be dealing with. And so when this whole thing happens, when it's done with Trump, every single ICE agent and every single Trump voter may need to be held responsible for this. I think that we need to start all the way at the top and work our way down, because the MAGA movement is treason. They have committed treason, and I understand that from the historical perspective of patriarchy and white supremacy and what America has always been, this is no different than the history. But this country doesn't belong to the white supremacists anymore. And this is the death throes of that movement. This isn't a rejuvenation. This is it dying. They are not a silent majority. They are a very loud minority. They are not most Americans. They did not win the popular vote in any of these elections. And, the apathy of people not voting is part of the reason that's a perspective that it's 50-50 here. 50% of the people don't even vote. I should pull up numbers before I just spout random shit, but I know for a fact that not 50% of people support Trump, because we didn't even get a voter turnout that would represent all of the people. Not to mention all the people that aren't allowed to vote. And, for various reasons, felons, for one, are not allowed to vote. And regardless of how you feel about immigrants, a lot of immigrants aren't allowed to vote. And people, so meaning that there is taxation without representation. And so I understand that this country has been built upon patriarchy and white supremacy, but there's a lot of people who live here now who don't espouse those values and are never going to uphold those values. So the country has to pivot away from those values, because the majority of people don't hold those values. And we're not going to be held hostage by a bunch of redneck losers. If we allow it to go this way, then the United States will basically look like the redneck version of what's happening in the Middle East, with their conservative religious organizations running around with automatic rifles in pickup trucks, terrorizing everyone, and the countries being, anti-women, anti-gay people. Like, the reason the Middle East looks the way it looks now is because of Western intervention, and Western intervention allowing conservative organizations to become the government. That is not what the people want. That is what the West allowed to happen. And if this country crashes, it will be the same thing. We will have Christian nationalism instead of Muslim nationalism. So, those tyrannical governments in the Middle East and anti-women and anti-gay people governments, those governments are not representative of Muslims. They are not representative of how the people there would like to be living. And we will end up with that here if we allow it to happen. And so this ends here. We're not going to let this continue to go on. And while I am not a great believer in electoralism because of the fact that the Democrats work for the same corporate oligarchs, and there's not a whole lot of difference in the outcomes. The only difference, as I've said before, between Democrats and Republicans is the amount of overt violence. So when we talk about violence, there's literally physically hurting people. And then there's, gerrymandering and financial violence and all these types of things that basically keep people poor and keep people dependent on electoral politics. And so, like, both of these parties are working together for the corporate oligarchs to keep a lower class. Like, electoralism is not going to create socialism or communism or any other type of system. It is merely going to stave off the physical and the most atrocious violence. Democrats are basically just like the really polite version of this practice. Yeah, the Democrats are just like the censored version of a very explicit song called Kill the Poor. But at the same time, like, the people are the government. And what I mean by that is that, under really the ideas of almost anything, you could look at it this way, but under the ideas of John Locke, for instance, like, the government is allowed to exist only in as much as it is there for the people, because once the government is not working for the people anymore, the people will overthrow that government. And so that's one way to look at it, is that, like, the reason it has existed this way is because enough people have allowed it to exist this way. And that's because it has worked out for enough people for those people to be complicit. And less people are being taken care of under this system. And with no quote unquote hope of the American dream, then, like, and now immigrants being attacked when, like, the promise of this country has always been to take care of immigrants and to be a country of immigrants. And now we're literally just beating them and deporting them and putting them in concentration camps, doing everything that Germany did. But Germany learned all of that stuff from us because of what the Americans did to Native Americans and chattel slavery. Like, the Germans learned from us. So stop comparing America 2026, 2025 to 1930s Germany. No, this is America. This is what we do. But being upset with the history of a nation and how it's formed, and understanding that the people that you live with and around are a part of a country, and that we're not leaving. We're going to make this a better place. The government is the people. And so the government right now that we think of as Democrats and Republicans are the representatives that have betrayed us. And they have betrayed everyone, really. They betray everyone for the corporate oligarchs. They are working for the upper class. And anyone who gets too caught up in the idea that they're going to save us is deluding themselves. So, but that doesn't mean we don't vote. We have to participate in the government we have, and we have to try to change things. But the reason we can't not participate at all is because if we change things to the degree that this system breaks and there's actually a different system that comes after this, you don't want the apathy of this system to carry into the next one. So you have to be willing to be active. Like electoral politics very much does not work. It can be proven with statistics between like what people want and what actually gets made into law and all these types of things. But does that mean that we don't want people voting? No. So we have to flex the muscle, even though right now it's being wasted on a system that we know isn't listening. We have to be ready to participate in systems that do work. And the only way you can really do that is to not be a nihilist about it and to look for places where your voice can be heard. And I think the big one too is like everyone talks about presidential and big elections, but you need to get involved in your local elections and you'll see just how dirty the politics is because and then that's something you can like maybe do something about. You're a lot closer to the people around you and your local government than you are to the president. So we can't not participate, even though currently Democrats and Republicans are a farce. I do want to see more third-party things, but I also want to see just alternate systems get created to the point that, like, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter who the mayor or the governor or the president is because we've created systems that stand against what you're doing or stand despite what you're doing or stand within and able to help people in a way that you're not able to, which actually gives that organization power. So this was kind of like what a lot of the Black Panthers did and a lot of Muslim movements by being able to feed people and house people and take care of their own. They very much set up a system where the government wasn't able to hurt them as much. And I think that more decentralized organizations like that can really, mutual aid and all of those things are very important. So I feel like my last couple of episodes might have gotten very nihilistic and very like, none of this is going to work. I've said, I don't believe you. And in a large degree, I don't believe people. And the sentiment that comes from is the idea that if I put my life on the line, who's going to have my back? And when you go on social media and you see people saying like, just various degrees of division amongst the left and liberals, and instead of like bounding together and being like, all right, we need to work together. There's always people pushing division, even amongst the left. And every time I hear somebody push division, this is how I get through that, because people make good points. I'm not going to say that a lot of the points aren't true. And you have to be watching for people within your organizations that are looking to make backwards motion. There's always somebody who's going to use your governance processes to bring you backwards. And those are the narcs. And that's how I treat people who push division too much. I get making a few points about certain divisive things and saying, like I said, I don't believe you. I'm not going to say we don't say those things because I said it. And, but understanding that when those things come from an emotional place as opposed to like a logical place and being part of like the way you plan your organization, because if you use division to plan an organization, you're not going to win. But when I do see division, if the person doesn't have good ideas otherwise, like if I see somebody that I listen to all the time on TikTok or YouTube or wherever, and then they say something negative or divisive, and I'm like, all right, you usually have good takes, so I'm going to like not let this bother me. And also because like, you know what, I'm not going to let it bother me. The point is to let it bother you. If someone says something about white men, the point is to get in your feelings about it. Because meaning like not everything they say is going to be true for every person. And if you go into your feelings about it, you're disregarding all the people that is talking about. And you probably hate those people too. So that's why if you're not part of it, don't put the shoe on. Somebody's just going to say white men this, and automatically that person may or may not be talking about you, but you're not that person. So don't don't respond. Don't be in it. Don't feel it, because it's not about you. And if it is, like, you don't need to take it personally, because you know damn well that something behind that sentiment agrees with the movement, the forward movement, the momentum. And that's the part you listen to. So when a person says divisive things, I look at, is this person usually right and now just in their feels? Or is this person just a person who always pushes division and is just anti, again, even if they're left and even if they are affected by the movement, they're so nihilistic that all they ever do is push negativity and division. I'm not going to listen to that person. So, yeah, I just don't, and I try to watch it in myself. And I know I also have a habit of, getting in my emotions about some of these things. And it's hard not to. But recognizing, within yourself and within other creators and other people, when they're coming from a place of like their emotions, and when they're coming from like positive forward momentum for the movement. And where I was coming from in the last episode is kind of a place of disillusionment with feeling like, not really believing that people want to make change. And part of it coming from, I mean, yeah, like I said, I don't believe that people actually, are ready to be uncomfortable. And I also don't think that's necessary. I think in the West, we very much get this thing in our mind that like things end. It's very much like the Abrahamic religions have got it embedded in all of us, this idea of the world ending. So even a political revolution, people are like, oh, it comes to an end and there's going to be a dark ages and this. It's like, no, like things might be uncomfortable for a minute, but things just go on. And like the people who know how to make systems operate just move on the very next day. So like, for instance, the Civil War disrupted a lot of things, but like a lot of things just went on the way they were in the rest of the country that wasn't directly affected. And even once the Civil War ended, one of the most disgusting things I can talk about is like the plantations that became prisons. And that's how you know that this country has only minimally improved over time. Like, Angola is one here in Louisiana, and they were a plantation. And then after slavery was made illegal and abolished, they literally just rebranded from a plantation to a prison and had the same employees. So you release people, then you find ways to put them back in there and you work them the same way. And then maybe there's slightly different methods of way you treat them. There's semantics about how you label them. But the reality is slavery never ended in the United States. It just got rebranded to prison labor. And that's why I don't support prison labor. It's one of the things I've always done as a person who's been very aware of racial issues growing up in New Orleans. A lot of division comes from being in your emotions and lashing out at your allies more than your enemies. And I think that a lot of the time that is, the last episode, the reason I was so upset is because all over social media, Marxist Leninists and anarchists were fighting. And it aggravated me so bad because none of us are close to winning. So even arguing over these ideologies that are both Western patriarchal ideologies, by the way. So like you're not even decolonizing yourself. You're just pushing more Western philosophy on the world. And, it reminded me, like I've been, I was talking about the Crusades, like in the Crusades, that was one of the big problems. Not saying I'm advocating for the Crusades at all, but one of the big problems with why the Christians couldn't hold, any of these major cities for very long is because they would fight over who was going to rule what before they even took the city. Before they even took the country. Like they would be in Palestine trying to like take a city, but they would get in a fight outside of the walls of a city about who's going to rule the city, and then end up fighting amongst themselves and not having a concerted plan. And so then they would in different areas go attack separately with no plan, and then they would get destroyed by the Muslim armies that were holding it. So I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not rooting for the Christians here, but like that's how stupid you are when you are fighting over who gets the spoils before you've even won. And that's, that to me seems like a psyop on social media to have different leftist infighting or whatever. And when that happens, it gets very disillusioning because you're like looking at, people that you otherwise respect, tearing each other down. And you're like, and then the funny thing was at the same time, like, the right was doing the same thing. And that's what made me also feel like it was a psyop, because this was around the same time that, like, they had that, I guess it was something for that dude that was talking out the side of his neck. And he said, like, you had Tucker and Ben Shapiro fighting, and you know what I mean? Like, you had all these like right-wing people like talking about how you're not right-wing enough. You're not the right wing. And so there was a lot of right infighting, and then there was left infighting. But like, this is such a psyop. Like, so that's kind of where I was coming from. And, but then like, rubber meets the road, and the state violence is upping the ante. And what I mean by that is they're attacking citizens, and they're attacking white women. So once they've moved on from minorities and not full nationals, and now they're actually just attacking U.S. citizens and shooting white women in the face, which, she was a lesbian, so she's not the right white woman, and her partner was talking shit. And so this guy was so stupid, he felt like releasing his personal cell phone footage, because he murdered with a phone in his hand. But yeah, this idiot thought releasing that was going to like make him look better. It makes him look terrible. Does not make him look any better. He was clearly the aggressor. Her last words were, "I'm not mad at you, dude." And his last words to her after shooting her and killing her was, "fucking bitch." So that's what we're dealing with. So yeah, it's stuff like that reminds us, like, we got to stop with the infighting. And I'm not saying it's just stuff like that, but like, we are the government, and it doesn't matter. Like, sorry, Marxist-Leninists, you need anarchists on your side. Sorry, liberals and Democrats, you need communists and anarchists on your side. So stop punching left, stop punching your own people, and remember who the enemy is. And I know in the last episode, I said that this is the really sad part, even the Republicans and conservatives are not our enemies. They're just stupid. And I mean that. And I'm not saying it like to be just ad hominem. They're dumb. They don't know what they're doing. No, like, I'm saying it's like they're fully bought into the propaganda. They are not being treated any better. They just believe that they are. They just believe that they're receiving something better, because the way James Baldwin put it is, the way he put it specifically was, when a man gaslights a woman, meaning to set her on fire, when he says, when a white man burns a black woman with fire physically, because that's what he was dealing with at his time. Yes, it is terrible what happens to the woman, but the man himself is traumatized. He said, what is wrong with this human being? And he will have to carry this illness and this sickness and this thing inside of him. There's something just as traumatic going on there. And that's not to have empathy. It is to say that these people are also victims to the point that they want to victimize. They want to kill. They want to hurt. And the angry part of me, the most angry part of me wants to say that the best way we can do something about this is for every conservative to put their Second Amendment in their First Amendment and have a happy 4th of July. Do everyone a favor. But as leftists, I would say, and liberals and Democrats too, you need to be ready to protect yourself in the streets because they are coming for blood. And it doesn't matter who you are and what you look like. If you're not upholding patriarchal white supremacy and you're not willing to seek how for these guys, you get shot in the face. And if you're not taking that seriously, then you don't know what we're in for. I don't think that these people will do my suggestion and just remove themselves from the board. So it's up to us to also be practicing our Second Amendment while practicing our First Amendment. That's where we're at. Stop with the snowballs and the water balloons and the yoga classes. Get with the program. So I have been doing a lot. I don't just make this content. I don't do this often. Although I did a lot last year. I thought I did a lot more than I thought. I did like 9 episodes, which I thought I did less, but they were kind of spaced out and lumped together. But I did good coverage, and I feel like it was as unbiased as it could be, considering I'm heavily biased. But I try to think about everyone, and the people I don't talk about. I know I don't talk a lot about everything. I don't directly talk about issues, because I'm not the kind of person who's just going to like talk about the sensational thing or whatever. But also, like, that's the big thing, is I'm not just going to be caught up in sensationalism. I feel like talking about that guy who was talking out the side of his neck a few months ago, talking about that guy, I'm not going to do it. I never talked about him before. I'm not going to talk about him now. Yeah, he got what he deserved, but I don't make the sensational zeitgeist stuff. I make long-term, deep thinking, philosophical, while I'm talking about now, I'm not going to talk about the thing on the news or the thing that's happening directly, because it is a psyop. The thing that we really need to be talking about is bigger than the little thing. And by arguing about the little thing, we don't talk about the big thing. So I try to keep zoomed out as much as possible. The other thing is I don't talk directly about demographics a lot because I don't like speaking for other people. I definitely don't want to be caught in a situation where I have a bunch of people coming at me saying that I misrepresented another community. I definitely don't want people feeling like I am in any way not supporting everyone in our community. The reason I don't talk directly about things is because I don't know everything, and I feel like there are enough people out there who speak for themselves. I'm not trying to dilute those voices. So I'm going to talk from perspectives that I feel help all of us. And it's not because I'm trying to be safe and avoid controversy. It's because controversy and being wrong about identity doesn't aid the movement. So I'm going to stay out of identity as much as possible because it's not my place to speak for other people in that sense. On identity, I would say that like I don't prescribe to gender or race in any of those things. And it's another reason I don't speak about it, because I feel like the ways in which we're allowed to speak about it are still prescriptive. So if I put a label on myself, then that label puts me into a community that I may not fully fit into. They may not want me in that community, and I'm not trying to fight my way into communities. So like I don't really lean heavily on identity, and people can say that that's because I'm a white man, but I also don't prescribe to that. I don't believe in whiteness. I believe that whiteness as a social construct was created in the same way that blackness was. and it's not real. When you go back just a few hundred years, European identity is not one. Europeans hate each other. Every different ethnic minority of, like they all hate each other. And to act like whiteness is one thing now is literally just to get a bunch of people who otherwise wouldn't like each other to hate other groups of people that, immigrants that look different and the black people that already live here. It's a way of like segregating further. So I do not identify with whiteness because it's not real. And the more that white people walk away from that thing and put that thing down and not glom onto it, then the weaker it will be. And I think that that's part of the reason I don't get into a lot of division, because the more that we try to over argue, like white supremacy is very real. White privilege, like I benefit from white privilege even if I don't acknowledge my whiteness. I will acknowledge that. I will say that I still look white. Most people will still treat me white. As long as I don't open my mouth and start talking communist and pro-trans and pro-black stuff, then people will treat me the way I look. I'm not going to like try to say that's not true. But who I am does not agree with that. And the only way to get rid of things is to begin to disavow and take them apart. Yeah. I don't remember how I got into this little area, but I'm going to get back to where we were going. And where we're going is I talked about a lot of content I want to cover. I want to do some stuff on the Crusades. I've got more stuff about social media and AI and stuff that I want to talk about, but I feel like that's less important. I talked about wanting to do the Tao Te Ching. The reason I want to cover Tao Te Ching is because it's something that I read daily. Might just read one or two poems, but the Tao Te Ching was written to talk directly to the rulers of the nation and the governors and to be like, this is how you should be in order to rule. I feel like the spiritual lessons in there, the paradoxes are the most important part. And I feel like, to me, we are all the rulers of our own universe and our own emotions. And if we want to form a strong, good society, then we must all individually heal ourselves. We must have emotional intelligence, and we must also have like actual factual knowledge and intelligence and the ability to critically think about the things that we learn. I feel like the way of life is one of those things. And I feel like a lot of people question me and they're like, I talk paradoxically. I talk about hate and love. I talk about violence and love. I talk about, being angry, but also wanting to love your enemy. And, Jesus flipped tables too. Let's just say that. But the paradox is real. And the paradox, I feel like the Tao is a good way of thinking about these things, kind of the Bruce Lee, like water is strong, and why water is strong by being weak. And these kinds of ideas really flow through the book, but it's focused in a place of affecting the world around you. However, I don't want to do that first because we're not in a spiritually peaceful place. We are in the bad place. And so I think first I'm going to mess with this one. And I'm going to start reading this one. Now, this one, The Art of War, I've also read numerous times, but I don't read it every day for the purpose that it is more practical. It is literally a book talking about how a general should approach combat. And it's outdated. It's obviously not up to modern standards. It was written long before there were tanks and bombs and guns and all these types of things. But the principles still matter. And the principles don't just affect how you fight, they affect how you operate within everything, like within hierarchies. Like, a lot of people talk about how navigating the corporate world or navigating the neurotypical capitalistic world in general is a minefield. Like, you don't know who you're dealing with, you don't know what their motives are, and you feel like you're always like dealing with double talk, and people aren't open and clear about what they want from you all the time. And more importantly, how you can progress through this world. It's never going to be direct. It's always some test. It's always a competition between you and someone who's a little more desperate than you. Or a little more, has some more nepotism on their side or whatever. So I feel like the art of war is more useful right now with everything going on. I think that, I'm not saying this to like spark paranoia. And that's also what I felt about last year's content. Like, in the beginning of the year, people said I was alarmist. Well, fast forward a year, and clearly I was not alarmist enough, because everything that we talked about in the beginning of last year came to pass. And that's year one. We got 3 more years of this to deal with. And and so I'm going to be doing the art of war. And I'm just going to cover it. I think there's 13 chapters, so I think I'm going to cover it chapter by chapter and just discuss how these things might apply to our current political situation and protecting yourself. I think that's going to jump ahead of all the other content. I'm going to just start on that. I might do my little one-offs in there. I really want to do the Crusades thing because I think it applies to a lot of the modern imperialism taking place in the Middle East today. And I think it would put, I haven't given a clear perspective on how I feel about the conflicts in the Middle East. And I think that putting it in the perspective of the Crusades will highlight that. And there's a creator on TikTok that's been doing something similar to this. She's been talking about how the Roman Empire became the Catholic Church, basically. And I have a similar kind of theory I was talking about. This is conspiracy theory, meaning like this is how I feel about conspiracy theories. You can have these loose threads and make these big proclamations, but where it becomes real is when you can start to like historically say, well, this, and this happened. So a conspiracy theory can be like overall, like quote unquote, vibey, kind of true, but factually incorrect. And one of those that I like to think of is how like the Roman Empire never ended. It just became the Vatican. The Vatican being the only country in the world that doesn't have a standing army and isn't invaded. And, kind of how that, even like the Roman Empire became the Vatican, the Christian Empire, the British Empire, the American Empire. It's all part of it. When you go through facts and every little thing, it's much more disjointed and complicated than that. But overall, it's not a bad way to look at the way that things evolved, even if it's not a direct transition. It's kind of almost like this entity, like when we talk about Moloch, for instance, it's almost like an entity like that. It's like none of these organizations would hold on to it. None of these organizations would openly say it, but if you look at the way we teach Western civilization, why does Western civilization begin with the Greeks and Romans? Those people have nothing to do with your modern day American. Why are we so obsessed with it? That's what I mean by factually incorrect, but vibes based there. There's something there. Anyway, so the reason I haven't covered it is because I want to be very clear. I want to write down more facts. I may have to reread the section of the book I was reading I just want to get it right. And also it's just not super important in the scheme of things. So Art of War. And then, you know what? I'm going to do something a little different. I don't usually acknowledge comments. And I've even thought about like turning off comments because of the reason that I've thought about turning off comments on YouTube and TikTok for the reason that, one, I feel like when I ask questions and I engage with the audience, I don't get anything back. But I do get a lot of, either troll comments or just bad faith comments, both on TikTok and YouTube. So there's a part of me that's like, all right, well, if I'm just, putting things out and not going to get great feedback anyway, and I'm also not making money, so there's no point in leaving the comments open, because if you're not driving a lot of engagement, that driving engagement creates more money. But if you're already not in a place where you're going to be making money, why leave the comments on? It's just negative to your brain, and it's not going to help me get anywhere. But the other part of it is because as an artist, and a writer and all of these, things, even this, I view this as an extension of my art, only in the sense that, like, I understand this isn't art, but I am taking some effort to not just be a hype content creator, but to actually be giving thoughtful views that intertwine my philosophies. And so this is an extension of my art. And, what was the point? An artist doesn't have a comment section under their painting, under their album, under their movie. And so I think this is one of the ways in which social media devalues the creator in general, is like, I'm not a slot machine that you can just put a quarter in and wind up and make me talk. But that is what the comment section seeks to do. The comment section says, you work for me, faceless person, faceless bot, internet troll. I'm just going to say something, and I demand. I could go ask Google, but I'm going to ask you because I want to put you on the spot, and I want to put you in a bad mental place, and I want to give you ad hominem attacks. So the comment section should not exist in an artistic sense, and so I've thought about turning it off. I haven't yet, and I'm still going back and forth. And if you have any views on that, maybe you give them. But I am going to address a comment because I feel like this comment touched on some things that I think are kind of important. So we're going to try to go through this as quickly as possible. And this is under the YouTube video, I'm progressive enough and any farther left is crazy. This person did give me some, I'm not going to read the whole comment, but this person did give me some compliments at the beginning, talking about how it's thought out, especially for an hour-long video with no cuts, which I will say I do have cuts. I'm just pretty good at that. Actually, mostly, though, he's not wrong, or this person's not wrong, because I don't do cuts because I took content out. I usually do cuts because I sat there for too long. Like, I might sit and think about what I'm going to say for a few seconds or up to 10 seconds. And if the gap is too big, I cut it out because nobody wants to sit here and watch me think for 10 seconds. But my point being that my cuts are for thinking, not because I said something and took it out, usually. And I do cut out some ums and ahs here and there, but typically only if they're associated with a large gap. When you asked how do you get people to work together and all you could come up with is violence, it seems telling the world and how you see its people. You have views like Machiavelli, huh? Others could be punishments, incentives, solid philosophy, and shared goals or common understanding. Now, first of all, I'm going to say you're kind of correct, but I was talking specifically about violence. But also, I'm not talking about violence specifically as physical violence. We're talking about financial and social violence as well. Ostracization is a form of violence. Mockery is a form of violence. The reason things, slurs around being gay or trans or a minority group develop is because you want to socialize people to act a certain way. And so you create these slurs that put down certain behaviors. That is an act of violence, saying that who you are is not who the society wants you to be. And so we will tell you to hurt yourself to be more the way we want you to be. So when I say violence, I'm not just talking about physical violence. I'm talking about social violence, financial violence, the many forms of violence. And I guess that could be Machiavellian. The other thing is that, like, right after I made that episode, violence, like the state violence doesn't end. So it's not just me. Actually, wait, real quick, I'm going to read a quote that I love. This is from Frank Herbert. I want to say it was the God Emperor that said this, but I love this quote so much. The convoluted wording of legalisms grew up around the necessity to hide from ourselves the violence we intend toward each other. Between depriving a man of 1 hour of his life and depriving him of his life, there exists only a difference of degree. You have done violence to him, consumed his energy. Elaborate euphemisms may conceal your intent to kill, but behind any use of power over another, the ultimate assumption remains. I feed on your energy. So what we're saying there is that all legalisms, all legality is based around the violence of people controlling the way other people live. Now, I understand we live in a society, and so we think of law and order right now as law and order is how you get it done. So law and order is violence. So when you say punishments and incentives, well, that's violence. Incentives can also be violence because who you choose not to take care of, usually incentives are bare minimum. So like human rights are now used as an incentive. Like everybody should get human rights. Everybody should get due process. We've taken that away. So now the incentive is if you are quiet enough and you shut up, then you won't get shot in the face and you might get due process. Like violence. Solid philosophy. You know what? Karl Marx came up with some solid philosophy, and everybody would rather listen to propaganda than actually read it for themselves. Most people don't pick up any theory whatsoever, but they have lots of philosophy and they hate communism and socialism without having read one thing at all. And it's because they can look at, the way Russia or Venezuela or wherever else, and they can once again absorb propaganda and say, I don't want to be like that country because XYZ, without realizing that almost everything you know about that has nothing to do with the socialist or communist system and everything to do with either U.S. intervention or the greed of the politicians. And that's what I addressed in my last video, is that the reason philosophies and governments and all these things don't work is because ultimately, whenever you consolidate power, the greed will set in and people will start to use that to their advantage. So that's why violence is so tough, because how do you decentralize state violence? How do you give everybody access to state violence? It's very hard. The people who have the access will use it, and the people who don't have direct access will be the victims of it. I also don't care how you downplay the responsibility of people for their actions. You say that people are compelled to cut off their family because of the government, or people commit crimes only because of the social economic factors. But when it comes to greed and money and responsibility, it's all of a sudden failing of an individual. No, I'm not saying that. The greed of individuals is partially because they feel like if I don't participate in the greed and this violence of the system, I'll be back on the streets with everybody else. So no, that is also not an individual choice. It is, if you're in this system, if you're on the treadmill, you have to squash people below you in order to survive. So no, it's not an individual choice. It is how they survive. You don't get to be a billionaire without killing people. End of story. It's not an individual choice. They had to do it to get there. Your ability to cut off people you don't like exists because of the violence of the state. So the state is compelling you to cut off your people, or is it your ability or your choice to cut off people? The state, what I meant by that is the state, like the reason you can cut off your family is because you have grocery stores and you have restaurants and you have Uber. And I said this in the episode too. The services that exist within the economic and legal system, which is the violence of the state. So your ability to cut off your community is because there is an external national community that allows you to exist without your family. That is what gives you the ability. So no, I'm not saying the state forces you to cut off your family, although the propaganda of you turn 18 and you're a self-sufficient creature that must leave the house, that is propaganda from the state pushing you into individualism and pushing your parents to kick you out. So, I mean, you made that argument. I wasn't making that argument, but it's true. So, yes, the violence. It's all rooted in violence. It's not like, maybe it's Machiavellian, but there is no denying it. Like all of this capitalism and all that comes from the idea of Darwinism and only the strong get to exist. Only the strong get to survive and pass on their genes and all this bullshit. All of that is violence. I didn't create Darwinism. I didn't create Machiavellianism, and recognizing that it's there doesn't mean I don't have to be a nihilist. I'm not a nihilist. I may have nihilistic tendencies from here and there, but I'm not a nihilist. I am an optimist. I'm a tech optimist. I'm a solar punk. I fully believe that even our doomerism, we are at a Malthusian point in our history where we believe that we're at the edge of a cliff and we're about to drive off. And I believe that we are going to, just like the Industrial Revolution, have another breakthrough that pushes us to a new plateau. I will do maybe another episode on more Malthusian type stuff. Like, for instance, mathematically, how can we survive? You know, I hear even people on the left talking about how the population of the world is too big. And as soon as you start talking about the population being too big, you are entertaining genocide. So the question really shouldn't be if it is too big, which it's not. But let's just go for the sake of argument and say it is too big. Are you ready to entertain killing people? Because it sounds like you are. Otherwise, we can talk about solutions that don't involve eugenics and genocide. All right, so trying to get through this quick. It's not money that keeps everything together. Then how come stock prices? Well, you can go read this for yourself. Basically, this guy is saying that capitalism and money keeps everything going. And what I'm saying is capitalism and money exist on top of state violence. And I'm going to just further go and just be like, capitalism is dead, my dude. Capitalism does not exist. We live in techno-feudalism. We don't own anything. You got to buy services and rent services from your own car. You don't own your music because you're on Spotify. You don't own your movies because you're on Netflix and Amazon and everything else. Every corporation is conglomerating into one megacorp. You know, Elon's buying everything. Warner Brothers and Netflix are going to merge. Paramount and everybody else and Disney and this and that. It's like, capitalism is dead. We are in techno-feudalism. If you're still arguing about capitalism, you are a dinosaur, because capitalism has not existed in any sense since World War II. Why? Because that's when the United States became a bully and started telling everyone in the world how they were going to shop and how they were going to act. And it's only gone further and further downhill with Bretton Woods sealing the deal and then Reagan and globalism pushing the nail even further into the coffin. Capitalism has been on the slow decline since the atomic bomb. End of story. We are now in techno-feudalism, which hadn't been born in 45, but the computer and all that stuff has been evolving this entire time. And by the time you get to the internet, that's the infrastructure. Like, that is the beginnings of the new world. That's when it happened. So it took another, 10 or 20 years, depending on what you call the starting point of the internet. But by the time we got to social media, the internet had been divided, and it's just killing the tech. Like, it killed music. It's killing Hollywood. Like, everything is being divided up amongst the techno-feudalists. Capitalism is already dead. I agree with you. He says, yeah, the US is probably at least 100 years from a communist revolution. No one wants to die for a half baked philosophy that gets stumped by the economic calculation problem and has a complete misunderstanding of time preferences. The only reason people would want to die for communism is not a love for communism, but a hate of capitalism. And there is a much more easily obtained means to achieve that goal than would not entail communism. You didn't offer any solutions, and I agree with everything you said in the sense that that was exactly the point of my video is if we want to get somewhere, we have to like actually do the math. And that's what my Malthusian episode is going to be about, is running some numbers and doing some math. China is doing a lot right. And China has been doing it right for a long time. And one thing, you know, when people talk about China being capitalist, China was socialist. In Marxism, it talks about how industrialization and capitalism is a step. It was going to happen. And that's why any countries such as Russia and Venezuela and China who skipped straight to socialism started to fail. Because according to Marxist theory, you have to pass through capitalism and have an industrial age in which things grow freely. And that makes sense in a sense that like you want the big structures to form. And then before they can ossify completely into unusable structures like they are in America, like all of our structures are completely inaccessible to most people, the government, the Ivy League schools, all these things, they're inaccessible to most people. And so you move to socialism after you've created a strong, vibrant society, because now you can, you know, you put your mask on, as we talked about in the beginning of Prepare for Turbulence. As a nation, you put your mask on, you get everything right, you get everything together. And once it's all right and it's all together, then you decentralize and you give things to your citizens and you take care of the people and you become socialist to communist. The reason China went back is because they were starting to fail as a socialist country due to economic sanctions, but also due to whatever internal pressures. And they had to go back to capitalism. They learned from, I forget who it was, but they got someone to help them form a new economic model, adopting capitalism, state-controlled capitalism, in order to finish that step before moving into continued socialism and communism. There's theory here. You can go read it for yourself. You offered no answers, and I 100% agree with you that nobody's ready to die for a half-baked ideology. So that's why I think, you know, liberals, Marxist-Leninists, communists, socialists, tankies, anarchists, everybody under every hat and label, whatever you are, we need to get together and start to talk about solutions. Stop worrying about capitalism. It's already dead to techno-feudalism. Capitalism is on its way out, and things like cryptocurrency prove that. Cryptocurrency is just like meth for a market. Things aren't going well, so we took some uppers and it sped everything up, and we're zinging around and think, you know, and like it's just the dollar is bad money, and anything overly invested on the dollar is going to suffer with the dollar. It doesn't mean that the practical value of things like Bitcoin and Ethereum or commodities or anything else in the world will not retain its actual value post-dollar. But right now, our entire world is built on bad money, and capitalism is not even the problem. It's the bad money, because you could have a capitalist system with better money, and it wouldn't necessarily mean, and I don't even mean capitalism as we're thinking about it, because the problem with capitalism is when you put money before people, you're going to have a bad structure. But as far as like the methods and the mechanisms of capitalism could exist under a different form of money and not produce this outcome, because the focus of society would not be to make money. It would be for other things. That's what I talk about with forming new economic systems that worry about how to solve the socialist and communist issues without state-sanctioned violence being the only answer, because state-sanctioned violence will only allow greedy people to use the violence, just like capitalism. So you end up with the same results, whether it's capitalism or communism, because of human greed. And so that's what we need to game theory our way out of. More compliments. 65% of it, I agree with you. I think our society from the ground up needs to be built off the incentive of good behaviors and then disincentivizing bad behavior. I think capitalism at its base does this. I disagree. We've talked about that. And you can go read this for yourself and comment to him if you like. We're getting to the end of the hour, and I don't want to keep you all too long. Yeah, I mean, it talks just about cronyism, but those things, you can't stop cronyism in the way that you're talking about. I think blockchain is a technology that helps with transparency, but I also don't think that everybody's personal finances need to be public to everyone. And I think that, these are some of the hard problems to discuss. But whenever we're talking about hard problems and someone acts like we already have the solution, i.e., let's just reform capitalism. No, my dude, we can't reform capitalism. We need a whole new ism. And it's not to say that money won't exist. And that's where I disagree with the left, is because it's too much of a fantasy on the left of like, we can just have a society with no money. And it's not enough of a fantasy on the right where it's like, well, the only thing that must guard everything is money. And it's like, that's not working. It's clearly not working. And everybody on all sides, for different reasons, agree that reformation doesn't work. You can't reform this system. You have to break it and start anew. And that's the same thing I agree with, like, even though I do read Marxist and other things, I read a lot. Adam Smith, John Locke, Marx. Like, I compare these things. I read all of this stuff. Also James Baldwin, Malcolm X, one of my bigger awakenings. Like, Malcolm X really opened my mind to a lot when I read that autobiography, because he went through political change within himself. And when I listened to speeches when he was with the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the things that he said afterwards, you see growth. And so I don't judge people for where they are in the movement as long as they're growing and learning. And so that's really what my message is about here. If you're a conservative to right-leaning person, or even a Democrat to a liberal that's just, thinks you're progressive enough, I don't mean to speak down to you. I wish I could be a little less emotional and more logical, not logical. I don't even wish this. I don't care. Like, I'm sorry that you get your feelings hurt about this identity that you've taken on. I don't care about offending that identity, because you're wrong. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that I guess I'm disappointed in myself for just getting agitated by a lot of this stuff, because now this person here seems like they're talking in good faith, which is the reason I responded. I was going to type back, but I said, forget it. I'll just talk about it. This seems like a good faith thing, which is why I responded to it. However, the arguments in it aren't much different than the bad faith arguments. They just did it with a lot of respect. And my problem is that you can go, instead of art, like, I understand it's my video and you want to put me on the spot or whatever it is, but like, or change my mind with these comments. I don't know. But all of these things are like bottom tier, meaning like these are things that almost any teenager could come up with. Like, these aren't like deep thoughts. And you could take all of these things and go have a deep conversation with, your ethical AI, your choice of ethical AI, Venice, Claude, Gemini, whatever you prefer to use. But you could go have a conversation about these things with AI and move yourself along in the movement. But I find that most commenters don't want to move themselves along. They want to hold you back. And so that's why I've considered turning them off. And, Yeah, so I do appreciate this person having a good faith comment, and they did give me some compliments throughout there, and I appreciate that. I do appreciate that they had such a long response. It wasn't just like I had a couple other comments that were just like rude, or not complete, and so I'm glad this person took some time to like actually made a thought out, yeah, they made some points, but I don't believe that their points are not things that haven't been addressed a billion times. But I did want to address some of them because I feel like I have my perspective on these things, such as capitalism is over. And so, like, what I was saying though is if you're more conservative than me, you're going to get offended by a lot of this because I think we need to end patriarchy. We need to end Abrahamic religions being involved in any kind of government conversations. I mean that in the Middle East and the United States and globally. I have very strong views about the traditions and institutions that keep us behind as a people. And if you're more conservative than me, you're going to be offended. But I think that you can think about some of these things and think, if you really care, then you can try to consider some of these things. And if you're on the left and you hear things that I'm saying and you're offended, especially when it comes to the money and the finance and the AI stuff and just techno optimism in general. Like, my frustration with you who are on the left but are not techno optimists, and not good Luddites, because Luddites are not just people who hated machines. Luddites are people who believe technology could make things better for the worker. So they smashed the machines because the people who own the machines were making it worse. Not because they didn't want to use the machines. They didn't want to loom by hand and whatever. They just thought, well, if I can loom by, like, and use this machine, I should be making more money, or I should be getting more free time. I should be getting treated better. Plus, a lot of these machines were dangerous and they were firing people. And, so Luddites weren't anti-technology. They were anti-workers' abuse. And so if you're a left-leaning person and you see the things I'm saying as libertarian or conservative, then like what I would challenge you with is you tell me what the futuristic options are. Because we're talking about the Malthusian part of it, like if you want to feed and clothe everyone in the world, that requires technology. That requires good systems. It requires good systems. And right now, good systems require tokens, and tokens are equated to money. And I mean that in any number of ways. I mean like tokens as in the AI sense, or tokens as in the computational sense, but like things require input and output, and currently most of those inputs and outputs require financial transaction, and that is on the manual level as well. So like to get food, we think about dollars as food tokens, rent tokens. One reason money is a good idea is because it is the universal token. You can just use this token to get anywhere and get anything you want. And nobody, like, it would be a far worse world if you had to have food tokens and house tokens and clothing tokens and every token was separate. It's better to have one. So what I challenge my friends on the left is, let's work with technology to create better economies and better systems of voting. And I believe all these things do exist in a sense like of adapting good blockchain technologies, good AI technologies. Ethical uses of these things will set us free. And if you're on the left and you don't believe that, I would ask you, what will, other than state violence, because that's really what the core of every economic system is. At the end of the economic day, it is the tanks and the bombs that keep the dollars flowing. So yeah, I'll be back soon. We're gonna be doing that. So Thanks. Went a little long today. Lot covered, but also go check out A Tale of Two Unks. Um, right now it's only on my TikTok. Posted on January 11th. Maybe I'll put it as a YouTube short too, but it's a poem, A Tale of Two Unks. And the funny thing is, both of those unks, one was a Republican and one was a Democrat, and you'd be hard pressed to tell me which was which. Thanks, friends. Have a good one.